I am a self declared 100% paranoid pilot, and I teach all my students to be that way.
Wow, that's interesting, Gopal. Can you explain that? Why you use the word paranoid?
Well, there is a famous saying that says that under pressure, people tend to not rise to the level of occasion, but drop to the level of training.
That's a really common saying in the flight training world and the piloting world, and I would agree with that. That is something that we use all the time when we fly.
So when I'm a pilot, I'm expecting things to go wrong so that my training and my preparedness can help me deal with them instinctively instead of making things worse by making a mistake.
Well said. In today's episode of Aviation Intrigue, we'll explore a few stories shared by me and Gopal with some sticky situations we've encountered in flight and how we got out of them. Fasten your seatbelts. We're ready for takeoff.
This is aviation intrigue.
So, Gopal, what issues are at the top of your mind when you're getting ready to pilot an airplane?
In general, there are things that happen or could go wrong in the airplane and things that can happen externally. But mostly, I'm worried about I making mistakes that make the situation worse and compound things.
That's a great list. So, things within the airplane that could possibly go wrong, and things externally, namely weather, which you have a story that you're going to share with us. Can you tell us about that?
Exactly. So I want to share a story with icing. And icing is when you fly through weather, especially cloud and winter days, they tend to form this ice on the airplane itself because planes are made of plastic or metal and they can stick to it. And the most thing that we are worried about as pilots is as the ice sticks, that changes the way the airplane flies. Most often it's not a problem, but if there's enough ice accumulation, that could change the way the plane flies. So we're always watching for that.
Sure. And that's one of the top hazards that we are trained to watch out for, checking the weather, checking where the clouds are, where icing is likely, and all kinds of other bad weather hazards. But with icing, that can happen just about any time of the year in some places, especially when you're in the clouds. And like you said, a lot of airplanes cannot handle that much. What happens when you get ice on an airplane? What's wrong with that?
So ice on the airplane just changes the way the airplane flies. And therefore, you have to make modifications. And if there's too much ice, your best bet is to land. And in the Midwestern states, like where we are, winter weather is always an issue because we have to be watchful for this thing. Thankfully, I was in a small four-seat airplane called a Cirrus, which has some capabilities to deal with icing.
It has a couple of the basic equipment, I think, to heat up things like your airspeed indicator and a little bit of fluid that you can put on the wing in case you do encounter ice. But I fly those types of aircraft too, and it only goes so far. If you get into icing, you really shouldn't be staying up in it.
Yeah, it's not that different than using a windshield washer when you're in a snowstorm in your car. You use a windshield washer. If there's light snow, it'll be fine. You can still see through it. But if the snow is coming on very fast, despite your windshield wiper and the washer fluid, you still see that ice and frost build through it. And sooner or later, you can't see through it. It's the exact same thing in an airplane.
Sure, and it can actually change the way the wing flies, as you mentioned, as well as add weight to the airplane, and that is all very bad in terms of being able to maintain your flight path. So you had an encounter in the Midwest with that type of icing. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, a few years ago, I was flying with my son from Indianapolis to Madison, Wisconsin in winter weather. Everything was going well. We were well above the clouds and there was no icing. By the way, typically, icing becomes a consideration when you're in the clouds because that's where the moisture is.
Sure. And were you up in the clouds the entire time you were flying? Was it a low cloud day, a high cloud day? Were you able to see right away that you were getting icing conditions?
No, the we started in Indianapolis, and most of the weather was fair until we got closer to the Chicago Madison area. So, if I recall correctly, there was a thick layer of clouds somewhere between 4,000 feet to 7,000 feet. So there was about 3,000 feet of thick cloud layer, and we were something like 8 or 9,000 feet. So we were well above the clouds for the most part in the flight.
And being above the clouds is a nice place to be. And that 4,000 to 8,000 range, that's typically where a four-seat airplane would be flying when you're going from one state or another. So you were actually above the ice for quite a while, but then you had to come down into the clouds.
Yeah, precisely. So until we were over the clouds or above the clouds, we were fine, but we had to penetrate. Interestingly, as we were talking to the Madison Airport controllers, there was a regional jet right in front of me. I want to say it was a Delta regional jet in front of me, and they were reporting ice pickup during their descent. And if that regional jet is picking up ice, I'm pretty sure my small airplane is going to pick up as much, if not more ice.
So that was the first sign that there might be a problem ahead. Did you actually get ice at that point? What happened next?
Yeah, so I was not in ice, but I knew there was ice because this regional jet is essentially following the path I want to follow. I'm maybe 5 minutes behind him, right? I mean, he's faster. And if he's picking up ice, I'm going to pick up ice too.
And so, what happened when you got back down into the clouds? Were you already concerned at that point that you had to deal with a possible icing encounter? Which, again, at the first sign, usually pilots are trained to avoid, escape, deal with it then.
Yeah, so here's where my training comes in and my knowledge of the system came in. So since I knew there was a potential for icing, in this case, more than a potential, actual icing as reported by this regional jet, I told the controllers that I wanted to stay high as far as possible and make a steeper than normal descent. So my goal was simple. I want to penetrate this layer of clouds faster and quicker to get out of it. So remember, it was between 4,000 and 7,000. I'm at like 8 or 9,000. If I'm lower than 4,000, I should be in the clear.
And that's about 3,000 feet of clouds, which shouldn't take too long to get down through, but you wanted to be a little faster than that because the Cirrus, especially, which is made of composite, can pick up ice quickly and have an aerodynamic effect on the wings very quickly compared to some other light aircraft.
Yeah, precisely. So what I did was I stay higher, and then I did a steeper than normal descent, which is not something I would do. It's not wrong. It just makes passengers uncomfortable, and I had my son with me, but it worked out fine. We did pick up quite a bit of ice. But once we cleared that 4,000 feet, it was clear again under that layer of ice, and I could see the ground, and that was a feeling of relief.
Definitely. When you're flying through the clouds, you're always waiting to break out underneath when you're on approach to an airport. And then if you're picking up ice, you're actually even more anxious about getting down through. So when you say picking up a lot of ice, how much did you see? Was it on the windshield, on the wings? What did you notice?
Yeah, so two answers to that. Number one, in flight, remember, I was in my left seat as a pilot and my son was in the right seat as a passenger. So we could see both the left wing and the right wing, and we could see that ice was accumulating. And I had my de-icing systems blasting full blast so that they were doing as best as we can. This is like the same as windshield wiper, running really fast with the washer using every few seconds. But despite that, there was ice. What we did not know until we landed and parked safely, there was still chunks of ice that had formed on the far wing tips where the lights are, where the green and red lights that most people know on airplanes. We found that they were icing. You know why?
Why?
Because the icing fluid does not cover that part. So it was beyond where that icing system could cover. So it was natural for that. And this is one of the things that people don't realize, that even if your plane has icing capability, like big jetliner, there are pieces of airplane that is not covered by these systems. And therefore, it's possible for ice to pick up. Like, for example, landing gear. It's not heated, and if the landing gears are extended, it is possible for ice to pick up.
Sure, they prioritize the anti-ice, de-ice systems for the leading edges of the wings, the fronts of the wings, the fronts of the tail. I think the Cirrus also has some fluid that can get on the propeller to keep that from icing up. But as you mentioned, the capabilities are very light in terms of getting in and out of icing. So it was a great idea to descend quickly at that point.
Yeah, in retrospect, I think what we did that day was slightly beyond what that plane could safely handle. Obviously, we got through safely. The entire area was covered with this layer, so I didn't really have many other choices of other airports to divert to. So I had to land, and Madison is not a bad airport to land because it's a big airport. In case of trouble, I could find help. But also, I knew that the airport itself was in the clear, so we made a decision to do this, and everything worked out fine. So it It's an emergency in the sense that it got my attention and my son's attention, but it's not an emergency in the sense of we didn't declare an emergency. So if you watch movies, I didn't say Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We didn't have to do that. The plane was fully controllable. Everything was safe until we were on the ground. It was, let's just call it a very anxious moment.
Definitely, any encounter in a light airplane with ice is an anxious moment. I've encountered it several times in my flying with the same size of aircraft, a similar type of aircraft. And as soon as you see it on the windshield, mostly, which is where the first sign is, the training does kick in. You turn on every bit of heat, every bit of anti-ice that you have, if you do have it, and then you look for a way to escape. Sometimes it's going higher. Sometimes you want to get back on top of the clouds to just immediately get out of the ice, proceed on, and find a way to get down without encountering it again. It could be a few miles down the way, or as you did, descend more quickly. Descend more quickly than normal to get through the ice, and you were already at your destination, which was great that you were able to make it there without have anything worse happen. But that's where the training kicks in, and you make some quick decisions. You know what systems are there for you, and it sounded like that was a good ending at the end. You made it down with a little bit more ice than you wanted, but it worked out.
100%. As pilots, we are trained. Remember, I mentioned the paranoia. I use that paranoia to help me plan for it properly. So in this case, my training kicked in and I knew what my options are. So I'm constantly evaluating these options. And while there are 10 different options, I picked the option that I thought was the safest to execute.
And the most important thing that we're taught also, along with training for any possible emergency that can happen, is to, number one, fly the airplane. So now, no matter what's going on, you are flying the airplane, and you are flying it again a little more steeply, a little more quickly than normal. But that's part of the training too. You're trained to manage all of those flight situations so that you can get down more quickly in an emergency. And I think that was a big part of the successful outcome there.
Exactly, exactly. And even though we're talking about a small four-seat airplane in this case, this could happen to big airliners also. In fact, this is why, if you're in winter months in many airports, you will see that when the airplane leaves the jet bridge, it will taxi into what we call as a de-ice pad, and they spray you with nozzles with these fire truck looking things with this fluid that sticks to the surfaces of the wings to melt the ice that's already there and to some extent prevent the ice from forming. We call it de-ice and anti-ice.
Yeah, it's really common in jets and airliners to have both of those fluids applied. You come down through ice, you need the de-ice to take all that off so that you can go flying again, and an anti-ice coating, which can hold on to that aircraft while it's doing its takeoff roll to keep that ice off until it can get airborne and get up high, which jets can do very quickly. So it's pretty cool to see that when you encounter it. I know that it does delay the flight a little bit when you have to do the de-icing, but it's definitely necessary, especially in the winter months. The last time I encountered that was in the Twin Cities over winter, where there was a whole line of aircraft waiting for de-icing operations.
Yeah, the one thing that's going for jetliners are actually two things. Number one, they fly a lot higher than we do in small airplanes, and icing chance is actually lower up there because it's a lot colder. And the second thing is their de-icing and anti-ice capabilities far exceeds what we find in small training airplanes or even small passenger airplanes like the one we fly.
Much greater. Yeah, the light airplanes don't have the luxury of a huge machinery to spray down the airplane, and it can be very pricey, actually, even when it is available. And that's a great point you made about the jets also being able to climb up above all of that. But at the same time, they're also paranoid of ice. They do not want to encounter it, and when they do, they do take action. Even jets do not linger around, flying around in bad icing conditions.
Yeah, in general, avoid thunderstorms and avoid icing.
So, have you encountered a de-icing operation on an airline or seen ice accumulating on a wing as you're a passenger in an airliner? Tell us your stories. So as you can see, weather is a big factor in flight preparation, and that story from Gopal about an urgent situation with icing is something that we have both shared. I've had several encounters myself, and it's just something you learn from, you use your training, and you're always prepared for that possibility. And in terms of an internal urgent situation happening in the aircraft. There's a common occurrence that we sometimes see flying light airplanes that can lead to an urgent situation. And Gopal, you have another story for us in terms of something happening within the aircraft.
Yeah, I do. I think it was late spring of 2021. So, like 4 years ago, almost exactly 4 years ago. And this happened again with my son in the airplane, in a small four-seat airplane, similar to the one that I mentioned before. We were flying back from Birmingham, Alabama, back to, I think, Madison, Wisconsin at that time.
And you had just a normal day, normal weather, nothing going on that in terms of any external factors that you had to watch for?
Yeah, it was surprisingly normal. It was reasonably clear. And we were flying maybe 8,000 feet coming back from Birmingham to Madison. Everything was working fine. There was nothing wrong weather-wise, nothing wrong airplane-wise, except we had a situation that happened that really wasn't an emergency, but could have become one.
Wow, that sounds interesting. Go on. You were just on a nice weather day, cross country flight. What could have gone wrong?
So one of the things that happened, and this is a simple thing, right? When you're taxiing or when you're speeding up the airplane on a runway to try to take off, sometimes the door latches can open up.
Sure.
Right? In a car, it doesn't happen that much. Your car doors don't just open unless it's a old car not maintained. Modern cars don't do that. But in an airplane, the hinges are not the same as in a car. And in fact, they're meant so that you can open it in case of emergency and you need to get out. But anyway, doors opening is somewhat of a common thing. It's not always an emergency, but it startles you. It gets your attention because pop, the door opens. And if you're taxiing, if you're going fast down the runway to take off or in a climb, when that happens, it's just enough to get your attention. And that's kind of what happened to us.
Yeah, I've had that countless times in an airplane, and they seem to happen especially during the takeoff roll. I think there's like an air change, a pressure change that increases the pressure momentarily in the cabin, because I've had all makes and models of doors pop open, and it definitely makes a loud sound, and it startles you.
Yeah, exactly. So in a closed cockpit, the pressure is different than the pressure outside. And when you're accelerating, in our case, it happened not on a takeoff roll, but when we were climbing, almost ready to get to 8,000 feet. So the door opened. And if you've been in this small airplane, they're hinged in the front. So honestly, nothing is going to happen. The door is not going to open beyond just popping off the lock. Because imagine this, you're going through a airspace or you're going through an air mass and the wind is kind of pushing, keeping the door closed. So it's not going to open. So most of the time, you don't even worry about it. But in this case, that's what happened. It did open up.
And it does make a loud sound, and you do get an inch or two of open air rushing in, so it gets pretty loud after that. And if the air is cold, it gets a little cold right away. So that happened while you were climbing up to 8,000. What happened next?
Yeah, so we were somewhere in southern Tennessee at 8,000 feet, and it's chilly. It's April in Tennessee, and at 8,000 feet, it got chilly. So my son is, I don't know how old he was, but he was getting a little nervous, and I keep bringing him close to me, almost putting my arms around him so that he doesn't panic. It's getting cold, but he is starting to panic. He's starting to worry about it.
No. And
Yeah, so
you were reacting then as a pilot and as a father. So how did that feel when you saw him getting nervous?
yeah, so my first thought as a pilot, as a trained pilot, is that no big deal. This is not a big deal. But then my parental instincts takes over, because it's not an emergency that the door is open, but it may become an emergency if my son starts to panic. And that's kind of what happened. So I told him to stay away from the door. I explained to him calmly all the physics about, hey, no big deal. This is going to not open. Don't worry about it. You're not going to fall off. You have, seat belts and everything else. Except he started getting more and more anxious about it.
Okay.
And that's the time that I made a decision to make a landing. It wasn't technically an emergency landing, but I was talking to air traffic controller over Tennessee at that time. And we decided to make a landing. And I'll tell you what, Elaine, and you know this thing, air traffic controllers sometimes are amazing. They helped me find a airport not that far from us. So we were at 8,000 feet. So we made a spiral nicely to land on the airport. So maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes after this happened, we landed.
That's great. So within minutes you were on the ground so that you could help your son, because you were busy flying the airplane regardless, and then having to deal with the loud open door and your son. You probably had your hands full. It was great that air traffic control was ready to just get you to a nearby airport.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is the door opening. If I was the only person in the plane, I would have flown it. I would have gone all the way to Wisconsin. It's really not an emergency. And it's not an emergency that I have to land. However, this is what happened. So as he's getting colder, I decided, hey, why don't you put your jacket on that little seal on the gap between the door so that it maybe protects you from that cold air coming
Oh
in?
no, no, I see what's coming here.
Oh no, it's exactly right. So as soon as he put it, the sleeve of the jacket got sucked out
Oh, yeah.
and it just startled him.
Oh.
He started screaming. He started screaming and crying because the sleeve got sucked in, and in his mind, he just froze. It's the flight or fright response, and he froze. That's the time I said, "Look, it is not an emergency if I'm the only one, but this a panicked passenger next to me, especially my son, is not a good situation." So we came down. Literally, I was on the ground for maybe half a minute, got off the runway. It was a non-towered airport, so just get off the runway, close the door, take a gulp of water, and say, "Are you okay? Calm down." He was still not all the way there. Take right off and continue on our journey.
Well, that was a great decision. I think with a passenger getting nervous in the aircraft, could have been anybody. I would have made the same choice. I agree with what you did, that you just divert, land early, fix the door, because in a lot of these light aircraft, especially the one you're flying, you cannot close the door in flight. There's no way you can do it. There are some aircraft out there with lighter doors with a different hinge system that actually allow you to just slam the door back in flight. I've done that many times when the door pops open. But in this case, it was just best to land, and that's a good decision. That's training kicking in. You divert to land, fix it, and then go on your way.
Yeah, that you're making a good point. So for anybody who's questioning, saying, why can't you just close the door? Here's the problem. In order to close the door, I have to like close it real hard, like in a car. But in order to do that, I have to first open it. There's no way. I'm going something like close to 200 miles an hour at that time. There
Sure.
was no way I could open the door far enough and then use my force to pull it. Not to mention it's on my passenger side, so I won't even have the leverage to get there. So it, like I said, it's not an emergency, but when a passenger freaks out, it becomes an emergency right now. Remember, I talked about we are trained and I'm a paranoid pilot. This is an example of it. Is that the last thing I want to do as a pilot is take a bad situation and make it worse. So that's kind of where my both pilot instincts and paternal instincts kicked in. And happy to report that everything, the rest of the flight was fine. He was always clinging on to me. So I was flying the entire flight with my right arm over his shoulder, kind of hugging him. Even though the door was closed, he was leaning towards me, which honestly, I totally understand.
Yeah, the step that door took in terms of sucking out the jacket sleeve. I've lost papers flying out the door when that little crack opens. So there's definitely a little bit of suction there, but you never have to worry about it opening wide enough to let a person fall out or anything. But certainly that's the first fear people might think when a door pops open. So what I do, because it's such a common occurrence, is actually brief passengers. Hey, the door might pop open. It's rare, but occasionally it's happened. And if that does, there'll be a loud bang, but nothing will happen. We'll just turn around, land, and shut the door. And I think it helps reassure people that if it were to happen, it's a known situation that was explained to them ahead of time. And I think that goes a long way in avoiding these little instances from becoming big emergencies, because unfortunately we have had flight emergencies occur due to a door opening and the pilot being so startled that their whole flight condition changed and they weren't flying properly. So it's great to just be prepared for any little occurrence like that.
Yeah, 100%. However, from a flight training standpoint, what we are trained to do is that if the door pops open on a takeoff roll, before you have accelerated enough. The best thing is to immediately reduce the power and slow down, get off the runway, get this door fixed. Not because it's an emergency, but it could become one, especially if it startles you. So, best thing, if you're not airborne, don't get airborne. Fix the problem and go. In fact, this is what we do. We do takeoff briefings every time, as you know, Elaine. Every flight, we do a takeoff briefing as to talk about what could go wrong and how to react to it. Because, like I said before, how do you do things instinctively and do the right thing and not make a bad situation worse?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, a great story. It was another example of flying the airplane, using your training, and being prepared. Thanks for sharing that. Have you ever had a door pop open in flight or anything unusual happen that wasn't an emergency, but that might have been startling? Tell us your stories in the comments. Gopal, that was a great story about the door opening in flight that you shared with us. And we want to qualify that by adding that if a door were to open on a commercial jetliner or some other large pressurized aircraft like that, that would be an emergency. And the crew is definitely trained to divert and get down and deal with that, because you cannot fly around like that size aircraft with a door popped open. So that will be a different situation. And in terms of a next story you have to share, Gopal, you've had a few urgent situations in just a couple of years' time flying, but you've got another story to share that is a category that pilots would treat as kind of what at the top of the mind of urgent situations, potential emergencies, and that has to do with something going wrong with the engine.
Yeah, so engine failure, whether it's partial failure or complete failure, is always, always, always top of mind for single engine pilots, especially because when you lose that single engine, you lose all the engines, right? Thankfully, both you and I are glider pilots. So at that point, the plane becomes a glider. But a single engine plane without an engine is a lot worse glider than a glider is. And we talked about that in the glider episode.
Definitely. It's great to have the glider training as a powered engine pilot, but definitely when you are losing a propeller and an engine or even partial power loss, you're not able to maintain altitude nearly as well as a glider. So that's definitely where, again, the training comes in.
Exactly. And that story is somewhat eerily similar to the story Amanda Stahl told us in a previous episode. So, what happened is that we were flying from Mansfield, Ohio, back to Watertown, Wisconsin. This is again, I think this was like summer of 2022, I want to say, in a similar four-seat small airplane. It was me, my wife, and two of our friends in the back seat. We were flying, and the weather was perfect. The weather was clear, nice skies. And we weren't flying very high, maybe 4,500 feet. Typically, I fly like 8,000, 9,000 feet. Today, we decided to fly 4,500. You know why?
Why?
Because we wanted to show off the Chicago skyline. So
Ah,
as you get
see it.
towards the Chicago shoreline, they will allow us to fly really close, like at 2,000 feet. And I wanted to show off. So I didn't want to go too high. That was, I had all these things planned out.
That's a great flight. I've done the Chicago skyline flight many times. And it's definitely a way to show people that what are the joys of flight. I'm glad you're able to do that.
Yeah, except I wasn't able to do that, and I'll get to that in a
Okay.
minute. So we were flying, and somewhere just outside of Fort Wayne, Indiana, say call it halfway, maybe a third of the way, I heard this bang, this noise. And then my
Oh.
control, which in this plane, there's a little yoke that looks like a joystick, and that started shaking violently. And the plane was
Hmm.
buffeting, very similar to the Amanda story. I immediately and instinctively, again, training kicks in. My paranoia is being put to use here, is that I knew I had lost at least one cylinder in the engine.
How did you know it was a cylinder, not something else going wrong in the airplane?
So I look at there's a gauge, and Amanda talked about this thing. There are these gauges, engine gauges on the airplane, which tells us how the different cylinders are. This particular plane had 6 cylinders, not that different than many motor cars out there, automobiles out there. And there are bars that show how each of the 6 cylinders are working. One of them was zip zero, to use the
Okay.
exact phrase that Amanda uses. I believe that's a technical term. It went zip. It was
Just
zero.
like that. Just within a second or two. It
It
was
it happened
nothing.
like that, not even a
Wow.
second or two. To
Wow.
me, it felt like instantaneous. The whole thing was like buffeting. Here I am, happily flying towards Chicago, thinking about it, saying my family, my wife and my friends are taking a nap. I said, I'll wake you up before I get to Chicago, like somewhere around Valparaiso, Gary, Indiana. And then the whole thing started buffeting. I looked at the engine gauge. It was down to zero.
Okay, so training kicks in. What did you do next?
Training kicks in, and I'm a safe pilot, so I'm always talking to air traffic control. In this case, I'm talking to a air traffic controller out of the Fort Wayne approach. And I tell them immediately, by the way, as a pilot, the most important thing you can do is immediately after you recognize the situation, tell the air traffic controller what's going on so they can be part of the solution. If you try to hide it, things are going to get worse. That's what I did. I called and said, look, I don't know what the problem is. I'm having some issue with my engine.
And that gets their attention. If they hear a mechanical issue, they're right on top of that on what do you need as the pilot.
Yeah, they don't want to lose you any more than you want to lose yourself, honestly. And they were fantastic. Immediately, they pointed out that I had just gone 2 miles past an airport called Smithfield, just north of Fort Wayne in central Indiana.
And that's that airport was behind you then, so you might have been aware of it in the area, but they were actually quick to point out that the closest airport was just past you.
Yeah, well, as a good pilot, any good pilot
Mhm.
should do, I knew I had passed it because when you're flying, especially on clear day, you're always, always, always looking for where the airports are or where the landable places are. Plus, your GPS in the airplane, which we're going to have a future episode on airplane GPS, and the GPS will tell you where the airports are. So I was very aware that I just passed it. I was literally 2 miles past it, and the air traffic controller not only told me that about that airport, gave me all the frequency and all the runway layouts and everything about it.
That's great because even though you had all that information at hand, you were busy dealing with the problem, dealing with preparing to make this unexpected landing at the airport. So it was great that they were right there with that information. I mean, that's one of the resources you are trained to use if you need it.
Yeah, 100%. And at that time, my complete attention went to how do I get safely back on the ground. That was the last time for me to be thinking foolishly about, well, nothing is okay. Everything is going to be okay. Just one cylinder. I still have 5 cylinders. I'm only like an hour from Watertown. Let me keep going. That honestly would have been the dumbest decision I would have made.
Yeah, any power loss. I had something similar, very close to the ground, where I had to do just a very quick after takeoff emergency landing on a crosswind runway, and there's one cylinder out, and you're actually losing a lot more power than you think. You're not just losing a fraction of it; you're losing quite a bit. So that's definitely the first reaction is that you just need to get on the ground.
Yeah, and remember, I wasn't that very high. We were flying at 4,500, which means that at best, I would have been able to go. If I lost the engine completely, I would have gone maybe 15 miles, 16 miles, something like that. So it's not a long distance, right? So therefore, it was in my best interest. Here's a motto that I have. Again, my paranoia kicks in. When something goes wrong in an airplane in flight, chances are other things are going to go wrong or could go wrong eventually. So I'm not taking a chance.
Great point. Great point. So you picked out the best airport you could get to that was nearby. And did air traffic control give you any further guidance? How long did you end up talking to them? Because I believe that's a non-towered airport that you went to.
Yeah, so it's a non-towered airport. That means that there is no control tower. We did an episode on control tower, an episode where we talked about control tower. This one is one of those 90% of the U.S. airports that do not have a control tower, even though it's a fairly major airport. So what I did is I told the air traffic controller, yep, that's where I'm going. And they gave me the frequency, they gave me the runway layouts, and they basically said, you do what you have to do to safely get the airplane on. I did not declare emergency. I did not have to declare the emergency, even though both me and the controller would treat it as such, at least as a urgent priority situation.
Sure. So some pilots might have elected to declare an emergency, but they would have received the same help, the same guidance. You were talking to them the whole time. So it was your decision whether to or not. And in the way you were treated just the same way, you were definitely given priority there.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to, and I did this instinctively, Elaine. I wish I had gone through it. In fact, I would say that I'm glad I did that instinctively because that's what our training is. I made a decision that I am 2 miles past an airport. I'm at 4,500 feet. That means I had plenty of altitude to go around and land safely. Emergency declaring is not going to really do anything. So that's the choice I made.
Sure, sure. And you were fairly high above the airport. Were you able to just see it the whole time and plan the landing that way in as normal a manner as possible? Was it pretty normal all the way down to the ground after that?
Yeah, thankfully. It was a clear day. It was a Sunday, and it was not a lot of traffic, which you and I know that sometimes weekends on a clear day in a non-towered airports, there are a lot of traffic, but this one was quiet. So the air traffic controller in Fort Wayne said that I can land whichever. I and in a previous episode, we talked about how we always pick to land into the wind. In this case, here's the good news that even though I lost that one cylinder, my plane was still producing enough power that I was able to fully control the airplane and I wasn't losing altitude. Everything was still under decent control. And I was right over the airport. So I made a circle. And the reason we do the circle is because there's no control tower, there's nobody watching who's coming, who's not coming. So I was able to visually look at that to make sure that I know which runway I'm going to land, make sure that there's no other planes on there. I made a radio announcement and made a circle to look at where I want, use that to descend and land safely. And thankfully, I was able to, on our own power, taxi all the way and park and secure the airplane.
Oh, that's great that you only had a small power loss where you were actually able to maintain the altitude. Because if you had lost any more or lost the engine, you would have been able to fly the airplane and control it. You just would not have been able to maintain altitude. You just would have had to select the proper airspeed to bring that down. And it sounds like it was a quiet traffic pattern, no one else in the airport. But you're talking on the radio was just in case somebody was out there on that frequency flying around, just to make sure that they knew that you were coming into land.
Yeah, honestly, I could have landed without ever using the radio because I
Sure.
could have treated this as an urgent emergency situation. But it's always a good idea. I felt I was in control. I did not feel like there was an imminent danger, even though if I was flying somewhere and there was no airport in the 20-mile radius from where I was, I may have done more panicking. But in this case, I was calm. Here's a bonus, though. After I landed, I didn't know this thing. I found out that there was a service center for that particular mile of airplane I was flying right at the field. So that was great. I was able to hand over the keys to them, take a Uber to Fort Wayne, get a rental car, and drive all the way safely, all four of us. Did it take us extra time? Yes, it did. Were we home safely in our beds? Yes, we did.
Too bad you couldn't make the Chicago skyline then. That's what happened with that. But it sounds like you had very good luck at the end because you had some experts who were able to bring in your airplane and take a look at what happened there, because that is probably the best thing you could hope for when you have an unexpected diversion like that. And the greatest part of the story you haven't told yet. So all the way down through this descent to this unexpected landing at the airport. Again, your training kicks in, you're staying calm, you're managing somewhat of an urgent situation, but you've got a great handle on this because you've got an airport nearby. What about the passengers? You had your wife and two other people in the airplane, and they must have been anxious and panicking. And what's happening? What happened with them?
Remember my previous story? I talked about my son panicking when the door opened. This time it was opposite. Somehow,
Really?
whatever I did was very calm, very systematic, and very controlled that none of the passengers, neither my wife nor my two friends, had any idea that an emergency had occurred. Not
Wow.
until I had parked and secured and told them what had happened, they had even a clue that we had almost lost an engine there, which
Wow.
I got to take it as a badge of honor. I felt like that's my training, that's my experience. And Amanda talks about this thing too. You train for this and you have belief in yourself, right? But until you go through it, you don't know if you will be able to do exactly what you're trained to. So I felt pretty good that I was able to not only safely get the airplane down with my family, but also do it in such a way that people didn't panic. Because again, the common theme is you can make a thing bad to worse by panicking, by doing the wrong thing. So it's easy to do that. So it's important to stay calm and do things very methodically.
Absolutely. The training is definitely big on that, staying calm, fly the airplane and use your training, but you never know. We can't possibly cover all the emergency scenarios we can encounter. So that really comes into play. And the passengers are looking to you to stay calm. I think it was really your calmness and that kept everyone calm in that situation. That's great to say that they I'm assuming pretty much napped through your small emergency and didn't know a thing until they landed. That is a great outcome. That in the service center, that's about as best as you could for a diversion that was
Yeah, I was
totally
jokingly
unexpected.
I was jokingly saying afterwards that if there was a reason to have an emergency, that was the best way to have it. 4,500 feet on a clear day, just over an airport, and you have a service center there and a rental car place not that far from there. It couldn't have happened better. I mean, again, when we are going through it, you go through all this emotion, but afterwards, I look at that saying, well, there's some stars I can count and some blessings I can count.
Yeah, I think that's definitely wow. You've had a few things happen in just a couple of years, but it kind of shows that flying light aircraft, even when something is going wrong, can be very safe because you're trained to manage it. And that's good to know for anyone who hasn't taken a small airplane ride, that it's definitely a safe thing to do. The pilots know exactly what they're doing. It's extremely rare that something were to go wrong, but they do very good briefings, hopefully, just to prepare you for anything small like a door opening. And that's great that you're able to share a diversity of stories there with passengers aboard. So, do you have some other questions about how light airplanes fly and how they work and what pilots know? Send us your questions and we'll find the answers for future episodes. Join us next time on Aviation Intrigue, where we have a very special guest, an insider from the aviation industry who has nearly 3 decades at her job, and she's going to share some amazing and fun stories about her profession and what has changed over the last few decades in that. So join us, and thanks for being with us today.